Chapter 6. 15 minutes later, Alden and his friends arrived at the Artonan consulate building. It was a blocky gray cube of concrete and glass, surrounded by a security fence. A trio of poles out front held the multicolored streamers the aliens used as their planetary flags. Even in the beginning, there hadn't really been enough Artonans on Earth to justify functional diplomatic consulates in major cities. And now that Earth-Artonan political relations had been settled for decades, the so-called consulate was mostly a place for registering as a superhuman and taking classes. The building's interior was more inviting than the outside. In the lobby, pale terrazzo floors shone under a dark wood ceiling flecked with tiny LED lights that formed a vaguely elliptical pattern. It was supposed to be a map of important stars in the Artonans' home galaxy, but it came across as abstract art. Jeremy, who was turning blue around the edges, had insisted that they stop at a coffee shop on the way, so they all had warm drinks. Alden had yet to develop an appreciation for coffee despite multiple attempts, so he was sipping a cinnamon hot chocolate. A second one was clutched in his other hand. "Give me a seconds," he said to his friends. "Gotta make my delivery." Jeremy and Bo didn't answer. They were having an absurdly serious discussion about whether or not the coffee run was counter to the spirit of their dare. Snow-damp boots squeaking on the polished floor, Alden headed toward the lobby desk. Sitting behind it was one of the only non-humans in all of Chicago. He was around 5 feet tall, with smooth gray skin that reminded Alden of a stingray he'd pet once at the aquarium. He had black eyes like a shark and a wide, flat nose with 4 slits for nostrils. Alden didn't think the alien had ears, but it was hard to tell. His head was covered in a couple dozen protrusions that were similar to horns, each about 2 fingers wide and curving down around his skull to flare outward when they reached the top of his spine. Their sharp points made a sort of spiky protective choker around the backs and sides of his neck. Most people, following a tradition that was pretty questionable in Alden's opinion, called the creature a demon. He was a deadly horned being purported to be from a dimension steeped in the dark powers of chaos. But still, he called himself Gorgon, and Alden went with that. Even though he assumed the name was more of a concession to human vocal cords than anything else. As usual, Gorgon looked bored out of his strangely shaped skull. He was chained to the lobby desk by glowing ropes of magic that wound around his arms and legs. Alden hadn't been able to confirm the details, but rumor had it that Gorgon hadn't left the lobby of this building since he was installed here by some powerful Artonan he had tried to disavow 40 years ago. "Morning, Gorgon," Alden said, approaching the desk. "Brought you a hot chocolate." "No thank you." Gorgon spoke without looking up from the pair of computer monitors in front of him. His voice was high-pitched, with an undertone like the tinkle of breaking glass. "It's not dairy. I got you one made with coconut milk." Alden set it on top of the desk beside a golden tray full of neatly arranged ballpoint pens. Gorgon turned his head a fraction of an inch toward Alden, but his eyes were still fixed on the screens, which never showed anything but security footage from around the building. Possibly, direct eye contact was rude among his kind. Alden liked to assume that was the case anyway. He'd been coming to the consulate regularly for around 6 weeks now, and he'd never once managed to look Gorgon dead in the eye. "Thank you," Gorgon said finally, taking the hot cocoa in long gray fingers and flicking the lid off the top with a thick, black forked tongue. "I also brought you this." Alden reached under the flap of his messenger bag and pulled out a plastic takeout container full of chopped vegetables in oil. "It's hot giardiniera from my favorite sandwich shop." He placed a plastic fork on top of it in a paper napkin. It didn't particularly matter that hot cocoa and spicy Italian relish was a weird combo to human tastes. Alden was still trying to figure out what the aliens' food preferences actually were. So far, all he'd managed to determine was that Gorgon didn't mind spices and he was sort of vegan. As in, he wouldn't take meat, dairy, or eggs from Alden, but Alden had once seen him eat a fly that landed on the back of his hand. Maybe he's an environmentalist? It's not like it's his planet, but he is stuck here with us. No more plastic dishes then. Gorgon slid his arm out, the papers on the desk glowing in the light of his chains, and took the container. He set it beside his keyboard. "All right," he said. Pleased, Alden nodded and turned to go, but Gorgon's voice stopped him. "Are you going to keep doing this every day?" Alden looked back over his shoulder. "Every day I come for classes. Unless you don't like it?" The alien tipped his head up toward the ceiling. "I like receiving offerings. But I don't know why you're bribing me. You're not physically attracted to me. I can smell that sort of thing on humans." His nostrils flared. "You don't reek of pity either. I had assumed you were one of those young idiots who thought the mysterious demon could grant you system access or other powers. But I listened in on your lessons last week, and you seem to be slightly less ignorant than others your age. So that's not likely." There was a note in his voice that might have been pensive, but Alden knew he shouldn't rely on his ability to interpret a non-human's inflections. Especially Gorgon's. He'd read literally everything he could find on the internet, trying to get information about the death demon imprisoned in Chicago's Artonan consulate. But there was nothing. Well, there were a lot of pictures on social media from tourists and extraterrestrial fans who'd sought Gorgon out for a photo op, but beyond that, there was only a listing of his name, a series of runes that apparently described his home dimension, and a few lines about his life sentence. Whatever Gorgon's species was, there wasn't another one of him on Earth as far as Alden could tell. And apparently he could smell pheromones? Or maybe even emotions? So Alden probably shouldn't lie to him. It's a little embarrassing, but I thought, if I ever get superpowers one day, it would be great to know someone with better insight into the system than the stuff that's available to the public. And it's not like there are a lot of options for that kind of thing. He gave the alien a nervous smile. "I guess I was hoping to make friends with you in advance in case I ever needed your advice." Gorgon continued staring up at the ceiling. "Ah. How unfortunate for you. I am specifically barred from giving humans any information about the Artonans, the system, my own kind, magic, chaos, extra-dimensional incursions, and a veritable encyclopedia of other interesting things. If it's not widely known by your species already, then I'm not allowed to discuss it with you. And the bindings on me are quite thorough. You've chosen a very poor advisor." He sat up straight then and cracked open the jardinera. He shoved a forkful in his mouth. "Though maybe you don't actually care much about the fact that I will most likely be useless to you?" He smacked his lips. "If you're already making plans for the day when you might be one of the fortunate few, you must have a high tolerance for disappointment. Your chances are worse than 1 in 1,000, you know?" Alden hesitated. He stepped back toward the desk and lowered his voice so that his friends couldn't hear him. They knew about Hannah, but they didn't know about this. "I have had a friend who thought maybe my chances of being selected might be better than normal. And if that's true, I figure I should do everything I can to make sure it works out. I know how it sounds. I've got backup plans, but this is I have kind of a specific dream." It was an embarrassing admission. Saying your dream was to be a superhuman was cute when you were a little kid. It was awkward by the time you hit 12 or 13. Now that Alden was on the cusp of turning 16, he was hyper-aware of how cringy it was, even if Jeremy apparently thought it was endearing. Alden might as well be making plans for his future career as a lottery winner. Gorgon exhaled sharply. "So you're a fantasist. That's amusing. Humans have no reliable means of determining who the system will choose. My friend was one of the avowed. An adjuster. Unless they adjusted you in morally disgusting ways, then that doesn't change much." Alden shrugged. He knew it was a long shot. Hannah wasn't a scientist who studied power acquisition. She had just mentioned in passing, one single time when he was 13, that she had used her bubble of patient waiting on hundreds of people and animals, trying to refine her understanding of the spell. And only 3 people other than you were conscious inside it, she'd announced. They'd been standing in line to buy tickets to a martial arts showcase that day. Hannah always planned some kind of activity for their annual summer meet-up on the island. All of them were kids of superhumans. Weird, isn't it? My best guess is you've got abnormally high CP. Not like we can measure it. But in theory that means you're more likely than average to be granted powers of your own one day. Don't count on it, though. CP. Chaos potential. Simple-sounding words with a meaning absolutely shrouded in mystery. High CP had something to do with people being chosen by the system. But the only ones who knew if you had high CP were Artonan wizards. And they were so tight-lipped about it that humans only knew it was a thing at all because the system sometimes mentioned it in skill descriptions. Children of superhumans were much more likely to be chosen than regular people, which was assumed to be because CP had a genetic or environmental component. Beyond that, everything was just guesses. "All I can do for you is point you to the restroom or the elevator," said Gorgon. "And if you were to miraculously beat the odds and obtain a class, I could register it for you with Earth's governments. I could also serve as your witness for a pre-affixation trade with another empowered individual. That's it. It's the same set of services I provide for literally anyone who walks into my charming prison here. No advice about skill or spell choices, no secret intel about our alien overlords, no contracts that will invest you with my mighty authority." He paused, then added, "I can give you as many ballpoint pens as you like. Knowing all that, do you still want to keep bribing someone who has far less power to assist you than your average tech support agent?" Alden nodded. "Yeah. I'll keep bringing you stuff. It probably sucks being literally chained to a desk. Is there anything in particular you want?" Gorgon stared at the space over Alden's head for such a long time that Alden began to wonder if their conversation was over. Then, in a strangely strained voice, he said, "I'm not vegan." "Oh. Do you want some meat next time?" "Sorry. I thought because you said no to a few things, I couldn't eat any of those things." Alden frowned, mentally cataloging the things Gorgon had refused to eat: shrimp chips, an egg and cheese breakfast biscuit, turkey jerky, a latte made with cow's milk. I'm not sure. Do you only eat insects?" Gorgon was breathing harder than normal. He continued to stare off into space. "I'm afraid I can't tell you that or make requests. You'll have to put some thought into it." "Got it," Alden said. Even though he didn't get it at all. Was it part of the don't tell humans anything about anything spell he seemed to be under? It even included his diet? That seemed way more extreme than Alden had imagined. But now he wasn't just idly feeding a possible future resource. He was genuinely, deeply curious. Why wouldn't Gorgon be allowed to request certain food? If the reason was only punitive, then whoever had chained him to the desk was really vindictive. But it had to be that, didn't it? If something bad would happen to the universe if Gorgon ate exactly the right piece of meat, then he wouldn't be here, where any random human could get to him and offer him treats. Right? Artonans weren't flawless, despite what some of scarier cults floating around would have you believe, but they also weren't that sloppy. So, it's definitely a don't let the prisoner ever have a moment of happiness thing, right? Alden decided. That's harsh. We'll trial and error it, he suggested. Looking forward to it. Gorgon definitely sounded sarcastic now, but Alden decided to interpret it as a friendly sort of sarcasm. Icy wind swept through the lobby as the doors opened, and Alden looked around to see a couple of girls with familiar faces. He hadn't caught their names, but they were both in his first class of the day. They giggled and waved at him. He waved back absently. "You should tell them you're not interested," said Gorgon. His face was fixed on his monitors again. "What?" "Because they're interested." Alden stared at him, perplexed. "They're attracted to you, stupid. So is that boy with the blue hair and your 4 o'clock. Best to put all 3 of them out of their teenage misery unless I'm reading you wrong." There was a mirror behind the desk, and Alden had the pleasure of seeing himself turning into a human stoplight. "Oh my gee," point Jeremy at the tall girl and Bo at the short one. "Problem partially solved. You can't just comment on private pref. Gorgon, it's not okay to." "Stop that," Alden hissed. "Tell them to stop it," Gorgon said. "They're the ones stinking up my lobby." Chapter 7. The courses offered at the consulate were not, for the most part, popular. There had been a 2-week Artonan language intensive that was well attended during the winter break, but now schools were back in session, and the people coming for extra classes in the afternoons and on weekends were mostly overachievers or geeks of some sort. The 10 o'clock class on Saturday was the only one that was full of relatively normal people. Alden and his friends stuffed their shoes and socks into the cubbies that lined the walls by the lobby elevators and headed upstairs to the small ballroom that served as their classroom. It was packed with other teens and 20-somethings, and all of them were barefoot except for one girl in a cast. It was rude to wear shoes or socks in the presence of an Artonan who was teaching you. Bet she wouldn't feel that way if she had to be here in person and smell the funk of 100 pairs of human feet that were sweating in winter boots until a few minutes ago. Alden took a seat between his friends in the back corner. Just after 10, the huge screen hanging at the front of the room flashed with a symbol similar, but not identical, to the one that always appeared on phones for Alden. And then their teacher was there, her image magically beamed in from another universe. Even though it was confined to the flat surface of the screen, the video had a strange depth to it. It was almost like watching a moving bas-relief sculpture. "Good morning, my students," Instructor Paweek said. Her voice would easily pass for human, and her face might have. Her bone structure was too sharp, her forehead too prominent, and her pale brown skin had a violet undertone that was a little oversaturated. But the midnight blue facial tattoos were the real giveaway. Welcome to our 5th session. Last time we finished our examination of the evolution of sentient life on Artona. Today, we will dance forward to the moment when that life began to understand the magic of the plains. She droned on, and the eyes of Alden's classmates slowly glazed over. This was a history of Artonan life. Virtually everyone here was taking it for the same reason. Passing the test at the end of the course gave you college credit. And in many cases, high schools would count it toward your credits for graduation, too, so you could double dip. It probably wouldn't have been boring in a human teacher's hands, but Artonans really had a knack for picking out the dullest parts of their own history. Alden had checked the syllabus, and the wizards from space had an entire 2-hour session scheduled that focused on the development of irrigation on their planet. Even Alden, who made a conscious effort to stay conscious in these classes, thought he might struggle in that one. Today, instead of listening, he wrote the Gorgon problem on top of his paper and passed the time by listing various animal-based foods. When he'd covered everything he could legally obtain and afford, he started a new section and wrote down a list of increasingly unlikely reasons why Gorgon would be unable to request specific food items. It has to be just a spiteful part of his prison sentence, right? He thought again, looking down at the list. Almost everything else that could have been a reason would have constituted a significant danger to society. And Alden couldn't bring himself to believe the Artonans would make a potential nuke work as a desk clerk in downtown Chicago. The next most reasonable option was that the restriction was to prevent Gorgon from requesting poison and ending his own life. But surely the alien had other ways if he was so inclined. The third barely logical theory was that Gorgon's natural diet was something so repugnant that the mere mention of it would cause a public outcry and demands that he be removed from Earth or executed. Like, if human babies were his preferred snack. Again, that would make him too dangerous to keep around. Plus, how would he even develop a taste for human flesh? There shouldn't be any wherever he's from. Maybe it's just kind of gross and not completely horrific? He pondered the one housefly he'd seen Gorgon eat. An idea popped into his head. Live prey only? I mean, it would be weird if that was it, since he seems okay eating veggies. But he's an alien. Oh, maybe he has to kill animals himself to make sure it's done right? Like a religious thing? He just gobbled that fly though. Didn't look like he did anything special to it first. He wrote down, live bugs. He could find a pet shop or a bait shop and buy Gorgon some crickets if nothing else worked. Or maybe he should do that first. Confirm the cheaper theory before he dipped into his savings to buy out a butcher shop. That's a good way to organize the tests anyway. Start with the cheap stuff, work from there. When the class finished up, he was busy making a new list entitled Extremely Cheap Not Vegan Foodstuffs for Non-Humans. Bo kicked Jeremy awake, and the three of them headed to a convenience store to scrounge up lunch. Alden grabbed a pre-made Cobb salad, and they ate at a small counter beside the slushy machines. "What's something extremely cheap you can eat that's not vegan?" he asked. "Is this for your scary murderer friend?" Jeremy asked. "I thought you said he was vegan." "Save some of the toppings from your salad for him. That's cheap." Bo was squeezing mustard and mayo packets into his Doritos bag like a monster. "Kind of insulting, but cheap. He says he's not vegan. But he couldn't eat any of the meat or dairy I've offered him so far." "I liked him being vegan better," Jeremy muttered. "Why don't you just ask him what he likes?" "He can't tell me." They both stopped eating and turned to look at him. "For real? He says it's part of his prison sentence or something. He can't tell us anything about our tonans or the system. He can't make food requests, and when I asked if he only ate bugs he couldn't even tell me yes or no." "That's weird," said Bo, frowning down at his chips. "I get why he can't go around spreading arcane knowledge about the system, but a prohibition on asking for food? Why would that kind of restriction be in place? Now I want to try feeding him stuff. Right? I spent the whole class trying to think of reasons for it. Other than it being a bizarre part of his punishment, I couldn't come up with much. Maybe he'd asked for something really nasty if he was able to?" Bo suggested. "Like human blood," Jeremy agreed darkly. "He's not a vampire, Jeremy." Not that Alden had much ground to stand on since he'd briefly considered the baby-eater angle. "Blood's cheap though. If you use your own, I mean. No idea what it would cost to buy someone else's." Bo used his teeth to rip open another mayonnaise packet. "And it's definitely not vegan. I'll take it under consideration. Do either of you know where I can buy crickets?" "You two are gross," Jeremy said. "Forget what I said this morning. You're the gross ones now. It's official. #, #. After lunch, they split up. Bo was taking a culture class to beef up his transcript, and Alden and Jeremy were taking beginner's word chaining. Jeremy had chosen it because there were no homework assignments. Alden had selected it because it reminded him of his mother, and it might be useful one day. If he ever went to medical school or nursing school like she did. Or became a hero like Hannah. "I really am a little delusional." He'd been thinking lately that maybe it was okay to be. It's unavoidable, isn't it? Everyone our age is in waiting. Sure, it wasn't likely that the system would choose you. But it might. And until you knew for sure, it was hard to let it go. In the word-chaining classroom, Alden took his seat on a square pad that was decorated in mystical symbols that did nothing to disguise the fact that it was just a truncated yoga mat. Jeremy flopped down beside him with an unnecessarily loud oof. "Today is for our portion of sacrifice," their teacher intoned. She was human, but it was clear she didn't want to be. She had very sharp cheek implants, and her foundation was leaning toward mauve. "We will begin with the gift of our peace of mind. Please, no shouting this time, Raquel. It doesn't make the chain stronger. I will come around to monitor your inflection." Alden closed his eyes and began to murmur the words that would offer his own peace of mind across the vastness of the universe to some other world where an opposite would be praying for the gift of it. In theory, Artonan healers and priests could tell when it was working. Everyone else just had to hope. "Sorry, opposite. I'm not super focused right now, so I don't know if my peace of mind will do you any good." Beside him, Jeremy was butchering the word chain with quiet dedication. Alden tried not to smile when his friend accidentally offered his opposite his actual brain instead of his peace of mind. "And I'm really not into it today," he thought with a smidge of guilt. It was a waste of time to say the words if you didn't mean them. There was no point if it wasn't sincere. Alden had this chain down thoroughly. And he was in the black as far as the peace of mind trade went. He had done more repetitions of the sacrificer's half of this chain than of the recipient's. Fine to fake it then. He let his thoughts drift back to himself. Whatever reasonable plans he'd made might be turned upside down any second now by an extraordinary twist of fate. Or never. Which wasn't so different from life in general. Lightning could strike you any time. You could find out you were terminally ill. A billionaire uncle you didn't know about could name you as his heir. Those things seemed like outside chances, though. and every single day, you heard about some teenager coming into their powers. Social media felt like it was wall-to-wall young superhumans. It made it feel like getting your own turn was a possibility just around the corner instead of something terribly unlikely. Yep. Delusional. The unreasonable longing had been worse since Hannah disappeared 6 months ago. Alden didn't realize how seriously he'd taken her opinions about what heroes could and should be until she was gone. He'd thought they were just acquaintances brought together by a tragedy. But he'd enjoyed hearing from her, and he'd naturally been a little fascinated. She was a person who lived in a different world. Once or twice, he'd even leaned on her when he needed an adult who was an actual adult. Instead of Aunt Connie. He'd stopped that when he caught himself calling Hannah for help choosing his classes for his first year of high school. She'd been cool about it, like always. But he'd had a mortifying moment when he hung up and realized he'd literally made a magic phone call to a superhero to chat about his Algebra 2 anxieties. He had promised himself he would pay more attention to boundaries. But apparently at some point he'd started idolizing Hannah, just a little bit, without realizing it. Because now that she was gone, he kept looking around for the particular light she had given off and finding that it was nowhere to be seen. "You good, man?" Jeremy murmured, right in the middle of another sacred promise to donate his neurons to an alien in need. Alden realized his expression must have been grim. He opened his eyes a crack and glanced over at Jeremy. Maybe he really is the insightful one. "Yeah, I'm good. Pound sign, pound sign, pound sign." Bo and Jeremy went home at 3. Alden hung around for the last class of the day. It was an exhausting intro to one version of the Artonan writing system, which was logographic and required brutal amounts of memorization. There were only 6 students. 4 of them, including the word-chain teacher, were there because they were pure Artonan enthusiasts. One was a PhD candidate who actually needed to know the language. And then there was Alden. He had signed up because he didn't see any point in going home on a Saturday evening when it would only be him and the cat sitting around together, wondering if Aunt Connie was coming home with fast food for dinner or if she was going to disappear for the night with nothing more than a met friend. "You good for tonight?" Text to let him know she hadn't been mugged. She'd gotten even laxer when it came to parenting since Alden had become a teenager. It was easier not to be worried for her or angry about her behavior if he kept himself busy in the evenings. He whipped out a 6-inch thick deck of flashcards and tried to pound the symbols on them into his memory for 2 hours while his teacher pointed out the minute details that separated one logogram from the next. When it was over, his head ached. He went to the bathroom, and by the time he got out, the building was empty except for him. And Gorgon. He wasn't eager to head out into the cold. Or go home. So he wandered over to the desk. "Do you have a room to sleep in? When everybody leaves?" "No room." Gorgon stared past Alden's left ear. "I don't need much sleep. I just stay at the desk or use the lobby furniture if I'm so inclined." Alden folded his arms on the desk and leaned forward to rest his chin on them. In the dimmed lights, the spikes around Gorgon's neck seemed especially eerie. "Do you just eat out of the vending machines when I don't bring you things?" he asked curiously. "'Cause I was thinking about it in logographic torture class, and you can't do takeout. Unless you call and say, bring food without requesting anything specific. I don't think that would work well, and I bet you can't order anything online either. I'm not really sure how magic works, but I'm betting the Artonans wouldn't have left that kind of hole in whatever it is that binds you here." For the first time ever, Alden saw Gorgon blink. It was incredibly weird. His eyelids were translucent with dark veins. "Go home, Alden," said the alien. "You're tired and punchy. You don't need to worry about me." I'm not worried. I was just thinking it sucks to be alone sometimes, and you're alone most of the time. Most people don't even say hi to you when they walk through the lobby." Gorgon looked back at his computer screens. "Plenty of humans come to the consulate specifically to see me. I have been extensively photographed, and I'm given to understand that there are plushies of me in at least one gift shop in the city. I'm practically a minor celebrity." There was something in his voice. It wasn't at all the tone an upset human would have, But it was different than anything Alden had heard from Gorgon before. It made him concerned he'd stepped into more painful territory than he'd intended. He'd only thought of all the social media posts with Gorgon and them as people being idiots. But it was darker than that. Gorgon literally couldn't get away from a camera. It's like he's a zoo animal. But he didn't want pity. He'd implied he could smell it. So Alden tried to rein the sudden rush that he felt all the way back in. He stood up straight and cleared his throat. "Anyway, I'm gonna bring you some crickets next time. Live ones." "That will be noisy," Gorgon said in a neutral voice. "Not if you eat them quick." Alden waited in case Gorgon could drop some kind of a hint. He didn't. "Hey, I don't know if you can tell me this or not, but you won't be offended if I bring you extremely weird stuff to eat, right? Because I'm assuming your natural diet must be pretty different from a human's, and I want to find the right thing. But I don't want to upset you." "Ah, the trials of a cross-species acquaintanceship." Gorgon glanced down at the backs of his hands. His wrists were raw beneath the magical bindings. Alden had never noticed that before. "I will not be offended. But, Alden, I truly did not mean to bring up sustenance with you at all earlier. I have appreciated and enjoyed your offerings. If nothing else, they are an amusement in a very unamusing life. My declaration earlier today, the one about not being vegan? Yes, that one. It was prompted by a costly moment of melancholy. It is not a problem for you to solve. It was melancholy earlier." Alden had thought he detected sarcasm. And how was it costly? Well, it would be costly for Alden if he had to start in on the more exotic items on his list of meats. "I understand. But you really reached all the way for a word like acquaintanceship when friendship was right there for the taking?" he said lightly. "Maybe I should be offended." "You're still bringing the crickets, aren't you?" Gorgon said in a deliberately neutral tone. "Chirp, chirp." Alden winked at him. "Have a good night, Gorgon." Chapter 8. Gorgon didn't eat the crickets. Honestly, it was a real head-scratcher. Alden had been so sure that the alien would actually eat them that he'd bought 30. Of all his ideas, this one was supposed to be the sure thing. What was the difference between flies and crickets? They were live prey. They were insects. Neither were poisonous. Gorgon couldn't have come from a universe where they scorned all meat except for Musca domestica. That was just stupid. Alden was baffled. But even though he didn't eat the crickets, Gorgon did seem to like them. When he thought Alden wasn't watching, he gave the bugs chirping on his desk and their plastic carrier a single, shockingly human smile. Then he'd relocated them all, placing them in various potted plants scattered throughout the lobby. For a time, Alden toyed with the idea that Gorgon might only be able to eat live prey he'd hunted himself. But there was really no point in going down that path. Gorgon could have chased down the crickets after releasing them, but he didn't. A couple of weeks later, their songs still echoed around the lobby in the afternoons. And if the alien needed his prey to be truly wild, well, it wasn't like Alden was likely to find an elk roaming the streets of Chicago. And he couldn't stomach the idea of baiting feral cats into the lobby. He had a semi-feral cat at home, and they got along well. He kept at it, though. Every time he came to class he brought takeout containers full of random food for the alien. One vegan dish, one meat. So far he hadn't had any successes. Maybe that fly had just annoyed Gorgon so badly that he'd eaten it out of spite? In early February, Alden dragged his friends into a carniceria that was becoming all too familiar and stared into the glass case, looking for inspiration. "You know," said Bo, while Alden checked the prices on Tribe, "I didn't want to bring this up. But don't you think you're focusing on this Gorgon thing so hard because you're trying to ignore something else?" "Like what?" Bo looked uncharacteristically uncomfortable. Alden saw him exchange a glance with Jeremy, who cracked his knuckles and leaned back on his heels. "Bo's talking about your friend's funeral," said Jeremy. "You gonna go?" Alden turned away from them. His breath fogged the glass on the cooler. "I don't think so." He tried to keep his voice casual. It's not like I knew anyone on Anzidora Island except for Hannah. Everyone who will be there was way closer to her than I ever was. "I don't want to intrude." "You should go," said Jeremy. "You should," Bo agreed. "Funerals are sucky by nature. I don't think you being there could make it better or worse for anyone else." "Right," said Jeremy. "Nobody else will care if you go or not. But you'll care. You'll be really pissed at yourself when you wake up the morning after and realize you missed the chance." There was a long, painful pause. Alden didn't know how to respond. "And then you'll go nuts and try to bust your demon pal out of prison," Bo said lightly. "Chicago will turn into some kind of hell dimension, and we'll all die." Jeremy glared at him. It was getting way too serious. "I couldn't take it anymore." He shrugged apologetically. "They do tacos de lengua here, Alden. They are good. Get those. You can eat them for lunch when Gordon rejects them. #! Word chain class that day focused on the request for a trade of luck. It was the first one Alden's mother had ever taught him, the same one he'd said in his heart when he was inside Hannah's bubble. He always felt a little weird about performing this one, even though he knew it well. While the teacher gave pointers to Raquel, who still hadn't gotten over her habit of shouting the words in a near-religious frenzy, Alden tried to control his breathing. He focused on his inflection. He made the delicate curving hand sign he hadn't been able to make years ago, on that night when he'd really needed it. Maybe that was why it didn't work. Yikes. That was a dangerous thought. Bitter. Childish. He knew from experience that he could spiral down from it into ugly emotions if he let himself. He tried to change gears. "Even if I don't go to the funeral, I have to call Hannah's friend back. I can't just leave her offer hanging forever. It's rude. Mucha cooters you humor it." He finished the chain in a whisper and started again. "A waste. If a tiny slice of luck lands on me today, I don't have anything important to do with it." It was 10 days until the funeral. Alden knew Hannah was almost certainly gone. It had been hard to get a straight answer online, but it seemed like only a handful of people had ever received a summons that took them longer than a few weeks to complete. A tiny percentage. Sometimes, the Artonans sent a message letting the people back on Earth know that a hero had died on a quest, but mostly they didn't. Real dick move there. Why doesn't the island complain about it? Alden didn't even know what kind of quest Hannah had been given. He hoped it was something noble. Something that mattered. Hannah Elber really wanted her life to matter. More than anyone else Alden had ever met. People say they want to make a difference all the time, but they don't mean it. Hannah had actually meant it. She'd planned for it. Worked toward it. Worried about it. I know she'd be okay with dying for the right reason. Alden wished the thought made him feel better. His mood was dark for the rest of the day, even though Jeremy kept trying to cheer him up. And his temper only soured more when he made it back home at 7 o'clock and found a note from his aunt taped to the fridge. She had gone to California. Just for a few days with a friend. The note said, "Bought some groceries. Call if you need me." "You can't do things like this," Alden muttered, ripping the note off and tossing it into the trash. "You know you can't." He tried to calm himself down with logic. What was the worst that could happen? He was almost 16. He had money of his own from his parents' estate and the settlements from their deaths. It wasn't a ton, but it was enough in combination with the scholarship money that had been set aside for his future education to guarantee he wouldn't sink if he had to look after himself. In just a couple of months, he'd be old enough that a court should be willing to emancipate him instead of shoving him into foster care because his aunt was a massive flake. But it had been close at least once when he was younger. Aunt Connie had done almost exactly the same thing. A neighbor had caught on. He had asked Alden if he'd been left alone for the entire week and hadn't believed him when he'd lied and said his aunt was just working nights. "It's fine. It's done. Having the house to myself is kind of like a vacation." He opened the fridge and found a gray plastic grocery bag full of sandwich stuff and mini orange juices. He stared at the supplies for a while. The juice had crushed the bread. She didn't even bother to unload the bag. Alden was unreasonably angry about that. Grumbling, he ate fried bologna and tried not to pick at all of the flaws in his life. The overdue electric bill sitting on top of the microwave was not a disaster. The pile of dirty coffee mugs his aunt had left in the sink could be washed in a few minutes. The tiger-striped boxer shorts, definitely not Alden's own, crumpled in a corner of the living room were kind of funny if viewed through a generous lens. But Alden's lens wasn't generous this evening. He didn't know why. Usually he was really good at letting Aunt Connie's chaos wash around him without touching him. There was a mewing sound at the front door, and feeling relieved to be interrupted from his thoughts, he jumped up to let in the cat. "Hey, Victor. You're gracing me with your presence tonight, huh? Why'd you go out there on such a cold nasty day, anyway?" The orange tomcat was named Victor because he was all scarred up. Alden liked to imagine he'd been the victor of many battles. The cat wove around his ankles, shedding obscene amounts of fur and meowing. Alden bent down to scratch him behind the ears. "Let's get you some dinner." He opened the cabinet where he kept the cat food and frowned. It was missing. He had definitely had several cans left, purchased from the same store as the crickets. Had his aunt moved them? He searched cabinets and drawers. He looked inside the fridge again. He dug through the trash just in case his aunt had already fed the cat entirely too much food before she left and then thrown the cans out. But there was nothing. What the hell? Did she get confused and take them with her? He glanced at the boxers in the corner. Did Tiger Shorts steal my freaking cat food? He grabbed his phone and texted his aunt. "Where's the cat food?" She didn't answer right away, so he gave Victor a small piece of bologna. After his shower, he checked his messages again. "Aunt Connie. Cat food." Still nothing. Alden stood in his room, drying his hair with a towel, trying to be non-judgmental. No way am I going to sleep anytime soon. I'm too worked up. Might as well make a bad night worse, right? It was as good a time to make a hard phone call as any. He grabbed his phone and pressed the sigil. He took a deep breath, then said, "Call Clive Zhao." The system connected straight to the hero's voicemail instead of to her directly. That was a relief at least. Alden wasn't prepared for a long heart-to-heart. Keep it simple. That's safest. "Hi, Ms. Zhao. This is Alden. I'm sorry I took so long to get back to you. I'd like to go to the funeral, if it's not too much trouble for you to get me there. Thank you for offering." He hung up. There. Decision made. Now to do something to distract himself from feeling so many feelings. Alden threw on a t-shirt, pulled a sweatshirt on over it, and grabbed the pillow from his bed. When he stepped out into the living room, the cat was there, sniffing the unwelcome underwear. "You want to go grab some tuna and meet somebody?" Alden asked him. Victor meowed. "That's the spirit. How do you feel about demons?" Chapter 9. It was nearly 11 when Alden arrived in front of the consulate building. The street was quiet, which only made the angry sounds coming from the cat carrier in his hand more disturbing. Victor didn't do confinement, and he wanted everyone in the neighborhood to know it. In Alden's other hand, he carried a pair of overstuffed grocery bags. His pillow was tucked under his arm. "I've completely lost it," he thought as he stared up at the dark building. "I'm behaving like a drunk person, and I don't even have the excuse of being one." Alden had always been a planner. He saw now that this was not an optional state of being for him, since without a plan he just did random insane things. The consulate was closed. Obviously. Because there was literally no reason for anyone to hang out there in the middle of the night. But there was something that looked like an intercom on the gate. "I came all the way here, so I might as well." He maneuvered the cat carrier toward the intercom and managed to press the button with a knuckle while Victor hissed and yowled. There was no sound or blinking light to indicate whether or not the device was working. "Hello," he said. "This is Alden." There was a long pause before any response came. "I see you on the monitors." It was Gorgon's voice. "Great. Can't I come in? The building is closed until 9 a.m. tomorrow." "Don't be like that, Gorgon. I can't sleep. And you said you don't sleep much. We can hang out. Like a slumber party without slumber. It'll probably be the most exciting thing that ever happened at this place. I am sure your family is worried about you, Alden. Please go home. And I am sure my only family member is on a spur-of-the-moment road trip to California with a cat food thief. There's not a single person in the world who will miss me tonight." The intercom went silent again. When it came back on, there was a dramatic sigh. "That's the most depressing thing I've heard in months." "Fine. Come. But I just mopped the floors. Leave your shoes at the door." A moment later, there was a beep, and the black metal gate rolled back on its tracks. Alden slipped inside, feeling childishly excited to be doing something a bit illicit in Artonan territory. As he passed by the flagpoles, he saw one of the lobby lights flicker on. He headed in, and Gorgon met him. The alien was standing less than a foot from the door, his golden bindings trailing through the air behind him like the tendrils of a jellyfish until they disappeared behind the lobby desk. "Shoes," he said, pointing at Alden's feet like they were on the verge of committing a terrible crime. "Yes, sir." Alden grinned at him and bent to untie his sneakers. "Just so we are clear, this slumber party will not be the most exciting thing that ever happened to the consulate. I've dealt with 2 attempted bombings and a handful of enraged superhumans over the years." "Oh. Well, I did bring snacks." Gorgon's head turned to the cat carrier. "No, thank you. Not the cat." Alden squawked. "This is Victor. He's my pet. More like a roommate, really. Anyway, he's a party guest, not a menu item." "Are the noises he's making signs of enthusiasm?" "Rage," Alden said. "But it's fine. He'll be happy once I set him free." A second passed, and Gorgon didn't say, "Don't you dare set that beast loose." So Alden unlatched the door to the carrier, and the tomcat rocketed out. He skidded across the freshly mopped terrazzo and pelted under a modern leather armchair near one of the windows. The alien watched with apparent interest. "Sue, what were you going to do for the rest of the night?" Alden asked, standing up in his socks to look around the dimly lit lobby. "Anything I can help with? I was planning to watch the monitors. And read a magazine someone left in the men's restroom. And sanitize the buttons in the elevator. All excellent things." Alden frowned. "But I didn't know you could go inside the elevators. I've never seen you leave the lobby. I can use all of the building's public areas. But my bindings do not allow living things to pass through them, so it becomes a tripping hazard if I leave the desk when the facility is crowded." "Makes sense. Let's go ride the elevator up and down and eat junk food." "Why?" Gorgon asked. Alden shrugged. "Why not? I promise not to trip." £. They wandered the building together, peering into classrooms and occasionally cleaning random things. Gorgon didn't seem to have much of a method when it came to janitorial work. He just occasionally stopped and sprayed something with sanitizer or glass cleaner and wiped it off. He did pay unusual attention to the windows, though. That's as close as he can get to outside, Alden realized. "Chips and salsa?" he asked as they finally made it back down to the lobby. He dug into his grocery bag and passed a pack of blue corn chips and a jar with a jalapeno in sunglasses on it to Gorgon, who took both with a nod. The lobby had a pretty nice vibe at night. The LEDs were sparkling on the ceiling. A lone cricket was chirping from a pot that held a fiddle leaf fig tree. And Victor was prowling around one of the seating areas. Gorgon beelined for the cat and chose the seat nearest it, watching the feline with what Alden guessed might be curiosity as he cracked the lid on the salsa jar. The cat didn't seem to mind the alien at all. That was a surprise. If Alden had taken a minute to think about it before he set off on this spontaneous adventure, he would have left Victor at home. It only seemed natural that an animal would be leery of a spiky creature from another dimension. But Victor just sniffed Gorgon's ankles and moved on. Alden crouched down toward the cat, and Victor raised his hackles. "He has not forgiven you for confining him," Gorgon said. "Yeah, I know. He's not used to the carrier." Alden had only stuffed the half-feral cat into the thing once before, to take him to the vet. He reached into his bag for a can of tuna. "Peace offering?" he asked, levering up the metal tab and peeling the top back. "It's your favorite." Victor padded a step closer. "See? He's a pretty forgiving dude. Oh. Shit. Victor, you brat." The cat had lunged, quick as lightning, and delivered a combo attack of bites and scratches to Alden's right hand so fast that he barely felt them before the furry villain streaked away to stand under Gorgon's chair. "What the heck, man?" Alden said in a wounded voice, looking down at his hand. There was a burning claw mark welling with red droplets and at least 4 puncture wounds bleeding freely. "I bought you the good tuna." He held the injured hand up, looking around the lobby as if he expected to find a first aid kit lying around. A weird noise caught his attention, and he whipped back around to watch the cat in case it was planning another attack. But the odd repetitive hissing sound was coming from Gorgon. His body was shaking, thin gray arms wrapped around the chip bag. For half a second, Alden thought the alien might be going into convulsions, and then he realized. "Are you laughing at me?" "Yes," Gorgon said, between disturbing hisses of merriment. It was obvious the cat would do that, but you did not know it. "Gorgon, I'm dripping blood on your floor. It's not funny." But he heard the amusement in his own voice. He had never seen Gorgon laugh. It looked bizarre, but it was also a relief to know that the alien did have a sense of humor. Gorgon continued to hiss with joy. "Fine. You guys are too violent for me. I'm going to go wash my hand off in the bathroom." Drops of blood were running down his wrist now, staining the gray cuff of his sweatshirt. Victor doesn't do half measures, I guess, Alden thought. He cupped his other hand beneath the bitten one to catch any overflow and hurried toward the bathroom. When he got there, he reached for the handle of the sink, then froze. A thought had crossed his mind, but it'd be weird, wouldn't it? Not funny weird either. Creepy weird. But maybe it would be less creepy now, when circumstance had given him the opportunity, than it would be at a later date when it would be more premeditated. Alden turned and elbowed the bathroom door open. Gorgon's hisses were still echoing across the lobby. "Hey, Gorgon?" Alden called. Don't let this spoil the mood if it's really off base. And remember, you promised not to be offended by stuff I offered you. Do you want some of my blood? To eat? Yeah. That sounded gross on multiple levels. Like I'm the dumb human in a bad teenage vampire movie. Gorgon had stopped laughing. Was he offended? Alden couldn't see him around the corner. He didn't say no. Gorgon only rarely said yes or thank you when he was offered food he found acceptable. Usually, he just took it and ate it. Alden assumed the verbal confirmations were reserved for things he found particularly appealing. But he always said no out loud to reject the non-vegan stuff. Except for the crickets. In that case, he had said, no, but leave them. You're not answering, Alden called nervously. What does that mean? Gorgon didn't reply. No means no. And nothing means he'll eat it. Right? That's how it's always been before. Or maybe he can't answer because it counts as a question about diet instead of an actual presentation of food, since I'm not where he can see me? That made sense. One reason the What Can Gorgon Eat experiment was taking so long was the fact that he had to be offered the actual food item before he could accept or reject it. Okay then. One bloody hand coming your way. This is for science. Completely normal science. Gorgon was still sitting where Alden had left him. His knees were drawn up almost protectively around the tortilla chips, and his clawed toes were clenched around the edge of the chair cushion. He looked like a gargoyle. Alden tried for a casual, everyday sort of stride as he approached. But he was nervous and embarrassed, and he knew he must look it. Hey, you want some? He asked when he reached the alien. He thrust his hand unceremoniously toward Gorgon. He waited for him to say, no. Or, more likely, get out. Instead, Gorgon just stared down at Alden's bloody hand. For a long, long time. Blood spattered against the plastic chip bag, and still, neither of them moved. Alden's heart started to pound in his ears, beating a rhythm loud enough to compete with the tinnitus that had never gone away. And then Gorgon did something he'd never once done before. He tipped his head up, and he met Alden's eyes. Pound sign, pound sign, pound sign. Alden had misunderstood something. No. That wasn't it. He had misunderstood everything. His entire notion of reality had been insignificant, warped, and just plain wrong. The Artonans had not imprisoned a creature in the Chicago consulate. They had not chained a person to the lobby desk. And they had not bound something that should ever be called a demon. Gorgon was something else. Something bigger than that. Something wonderfully and terribly close to sacred. Looking into his eyes was like being stabbed through the gut by a distillation of every profound moment Alden had ever experienced in his life. He heard the sound of his mother's heartbeat in the womb, felt the cool emptiness of a wood as he placed a daisy on top of his father's casket, recalled in glaring detail the first sunrise he'd ever paused to observe. And those were only the impressions that would stick with him when it was over. In the moment, they came at him simultaneously with 1,000 others, and he lost all sense of his present reality. When he came to, hours later, he was lying in textbook perfect recovery position on the cold floor. His hand was bandaged with a paper napkin and a generous amount of clear packaging tape. And his cat was calmly eating a can of tuna 3 inches away from his nose. Alden groaned and sat up. Physically he felt fine. Mentally, he felt like his brain had been unspooled. He looked around the lobby cautiously. The sun wasn't up yet, but the sky had begun to pale. Gorgon was at the desk, chin resting on his knuckles as he stared at the security monitors. Alden approached him cautiously, keeping his own eyes averted just in case. "Gorgon," he said, too overwhelmed to be ashamed of what he was about to say. "Are you some kind of a god?" "No," Gorgon said simply. "Of course not. What kind of a god would get trapped in a lobby?" "Right. I was just checking. Because that thing with your eyes, that was kind of intense. Do you feel all right?" Gorgon asked, peering at the half-empty salsa jar beside his stapler. Alden hesitated. "I do. But what just happened? What was that?" "It saddens me that I am prevented from explaining it to you, Alden." Gorgon lifted an arm to show off his magic manacle. "Well, did you taste some of my blood at least?" Alden tried for a jocular tone and fell short. "I feel like I missed something." "I haven't. It wouldn't have been right under the circumstances." Alden looked down at his bandaged hand nervously. "Should I offer it to you again?" "You don't know what you're doing, child." Given the situation, Alden couldn't even object to being called a kid. "Yeah, I get that I don't. I really get that I don't. But you're still offering. Well, I trust that you're not going to go all Dracula on me. We're friends, aren't we?" Gorgon muttered something under his breath. Then, out loud, he said, "I'm not sure two people can be friends when one of them is incapable of presenting themselves as they truly are and the other is incapable of grasping it." Alden raised an eyebrow. "I feel like there was an insult buried in there." "Only a factual statement. We are not friends. But I am fond of you and wish you well. If I accept your offering, there will be side effects." "Bad ones or good ones?" Gorgon made a sharp clicking sound in the back of his throat. "Frustration maybe." It seemed like he couldn't say much else. Alden thought about it. And what it boiled down to was that he trusted Gorgon more than ever after. Whatever that was. There had always been a wriggling worm of doubt in Alden's mind about the alien. He was chained up for what the internet said was attempted murder after all. Even if Alden liked him and enjoyed his company, a tiny piece of his better judgment had advised caution. That piece was gone. It had been completely obliterated by the experience of meeting Gorgon's gaze. And though that fact alone should have raised fresh alarm bells, it didn't. Whatever Gorgon was, his presence felt fundamentally benevolent. Which was really, really unexpected. Because now that Alden thought about it, he couldn't recall a single other person he'd ever encountered in his life who'd given off the particular vibe. "I trust you," Alden said. "You can have some of my blood. If that's something you want to do, I mean." He flopped his taped-up hand onto the desk. "No need," Gorgon said lightly. He gestured toward the jar of salsa. "I put a few drops in here before I wrapped your hand just in case you were quite sure about the offering." "You made blood Gaspico," Alden said. "That's not at all unsettling." "And yeah, I'm sure." Gorgon looked up at him, and Alden took an involuntary step back, bracing for impact. But nothing happened this time. He found himself staring at his own reflection in the alien's liquid black eyes. "I see. You are sure. How dear of you." Then, without any further explanation, he opened the jar of salsa and took a sip. Alden held his breath and clenched his fists. He expected angelic choirs or an explosion of light or a full Artonan military bombardment or something. But nothing happened at all. What? No point in asking serious questions. He won't be able to tell you. "What's it taste like?" "Like salsa," said Gorgon. "I didn't slit your jugular and pour it in. It's just a couple of drops." Alden kept waiting. He wasn't sure for what. Maybe part of them still expected Gorgon to explain what was going on even though the alien had just said he couldn't. Finally, he snapped out of it. "So, what do we do now? You should go home and sleep for a couple of hours. Then, you should come back for your classes later today." "That's it?" Gorgon paused. He licked his lips slightly and tipped his head from side to side a few times. You should come by again this evening. We can talk about your plans." "What plans?" Gorgon looked down into the salsa. "You told me once you had specific dreams for your future in the event that you were chosen by the system. I would like to hear them." "Oh. Okay." Alden scratched the back of his head. "You know, if you enjoyed the slumber party and want to do it again, you don't have to make an excuse." "I wish I could roll my eyes as humans do," said Gorgon. "It's a beautifully emotive gesture." Alden snorted. Their conversation ended there, and he packed up his things to leave. Getting Victor back into the cat carrier was an aerobic experience for both of them. Alden almost lost a finger. He tossed the empty tuna can into the garbage and headed for the door. "See you again in a few hours, Gorgon. And I guess we'll talk tonight?" "Yes." "Cool." Alden's hand was on the door handle when Gorgon suddenly said, 70%. Alden glanced back. "What's that?" "I said your chances of being chosen by the system were less than 1 in 1,000. I have revised my estimate. Your friend was right. There is around a 70% chance that you will be selected by the contract." Chapter 10. The shock took a while to hit. Probably because Alden was already processing a lot at the moment. Hannah's funeral was coming up. Gorgon's eyeballs had the power to make you recall in perfect clarity your time in the womb. He'd given the alien his own blood to drink, and he thought, upon reflection, that it might have been part of some kind of magic ritual and not just snack time. All typical stuff. Anyway, when an extra-dimensional being told him out of the blue that he had a 70% chance of becoming a superhero, Alden Thorne said, "Oh, that's interesting. Thanks for letting me know." As if his strange not friend had just given him the weather forecast. Then, he left the consulate and fought his way back home with Victor yowling and screeching inside his cat crate. Sundays weren't as busy as Saturdays, but he still had a midday class to prep for. Jeremy and Bo were having a platypus-themed meme battle in their group chat that morning, so his phone kept pinging him. And he needed to call and pay the electric bill. Good thing I've got Aunt Connie's current credit card numbers memorized. All in all, he was just too busy to have a freakout over one more thing. At least at first. When he finally got the cat settled and removed all the packaging tape from his bitten hand, he headed into the kitchen for breakfast. As he was reaching into the fridge for orange juice, his phone rang. He answered it. "Hey, you wanna grab a late breakfast at the diner?" Jeremy asked before Alden could even say hello. "Bo says he's eating a box of Lucky Charms and watching anime, but if you say you're going, he'll feel left out and change his mind." Alden considered it. Hot breakfast sounded good, but I'm pretty low on funds, and my aunt bailed for the week. I should probably cut back until she comes home. He'd already spent pretty much all of the cash he'd saved over the summer on food for himself, Gorgon, and the cat. Until he turned 18 or was emancipated, Alden's inheritance was only accessible for education expenses. And with the weekend classes, he hadn't been taking odd jobs from the neighbors to earn pocket money. "I'll buy, man," Jeremy said easily. "You can pay me back later. Or not. It's all good." Alden considered it. Jeremy's parents were both lawyers. They literally left cash lying around the house for their son to use if he wanted. Yeah. I'll take you up on that. Thanks. He checked the microwave clock. See you at 10? He had just enough time to trash the tiger shorts and shove a load of his own clothes into the washer before he headed out the door again. He met his friends in front of a diner in Jeremy's neighborhood. Bo was watching the tail end of a cartoon on his phone while Jeremy peered over his shoulder. Awesome. You're here. Jeremy said brightly when he spotted Alden. Let's go. I'm gonna order steak and eggs and enough bacon to kill me. Your goals are admirable, said Bo. Throw in some hash browns, and you've just described my dream breakfast, Alden agreed. The bell over the door tinkled when they entered. It was very much a local joint. Lots of old folks were there for the senior discount, and there were a pair of televisions in opposite corners playing a news station on low volume. The place smelled like grease, but in a good way. The three of them slid into a vinyl booth and took their menus. Alden's was sticky with the syrup-y fingerprints of whoever had held it last. The diner was one of those places that would let you order the whole menu no matter what time of day it was, so Bo inevitably spent 10 minutes trying to decide what he wanted to eat. While his friends debated the merits of cheeseburgers versus Weston omelets, Alden ordered a hot chocolate. It came as a mug of steaming water and a pouch of dry mix, and he stirred it up while he stared at the closed caption scrolling across the bottom of the TV opposite him. Someone in Naperville just became a C-rank shaper, he said, watching the dimpled brunette girl on screen. She wasn't nervous at all. She was beaming as she chatted with the interviewer. Her large hoop earring swung back and forth as she gestured animatedly. That's a mediocre rank. Bo glanced at the television. Not superhero level, but with shaper classes, they sometimes still get lucky enough with skills to do something interesting. What's her starting element? Object. Sounds like she wants to go deep into it, too, instead of trying to branch out with new skills. The elements world shapers used were defined by the system in a way that didn't match well with human logic. The usual ones were ground, sky, life, water, and object. Though sometimes someone got a super specific curveball or just shaping in general with no specialty. Object shapers could move and morph objects, and generally the more crafted the thing was, the easier they could play with it. Couldn't do a thing with a rock freshly pulled from the earth, but if it had been cut into a gemstone they could at least start to impact it with their power. They could do amazing things with higher tech stuff, though. One of Alden's favorite object shapers was a hero whose shtick was turning cars into robots that were really just glorified person-shaped battering rams he operated telekinetically. It was pretty obvious the guy wished he'd been given the machine-right class instead. That's flexible at least, Bo said, still looking at the girl on screen. Maybe when she's finished training, the city will hire her for some kind of hometown hero PR, and she can replace Sharon. Jeremy groaned. No. Not this again. Bo pointed at him with a half-unwrapped drinking straw. You can't just force people to do the first-name-only thing. If you're Elvis, you're Elvis. If you're Michelangelo, you're Michelangelo. You make an impact. People notice. Then, you become a mononym. You don't just wake up one day and tell people you're so important that you don't need a surname anymore. Anyone who tries to make it happen on their own, especially when their name is as basic as Sharon, deserves to be punished for criminal narcissism. I don't disagree, said Alden, scooting over in the booth so that his friend didn't stab him with a waving straw. But I think you're probably a little too passionate about this one, Bo. He brought his mug to his lips. He was anticipating a warm sip of overly sweetened generic brand chocolate, but instead his hand clenched in an involuntary death grip around the mug's handle. The hot ceramic burned against his lips, and his eyes widened in alarm. Alden felt like he'd just run face first into a giant flashing stop sign. I can't drink this, he thought adamantly, setting the mug down so hard that he slurped some of the cocoa on the table. The cow didn't give it to me. What the hell? Alden breathed. Was that thought even mine? It felt like it was, but how could that be true? The cow didn't give it to me? He had never had a concern like that in his life. Right? Bo said. It would be slightly forgivable if her name was unique. But there are thousands of Sharons out there. She can't just do them dirty that way. Alden laughed hysterically. Bo didn't notice, but Jeremy gave him a confused look. Alden waved him off and stared into the depths of his hot chocolate. He flipped the crumpled packet over and read the back. It had powdered milk in it. No surprise there. He tried to drink it again. It smelled good. He wasn't grossed out by it or anything. In fact, he wanted it. He was thirsty. He craved sugar. But there was some kind of mental wall between him and the act of drinking the chocolate. It wasn't even like he had a sudden moral problem with it. He wasn't upset that Bo was sitting beside him with an iced coffee that was at least a third cream. But in his own mind the wall stood there, solid and free of any kind of emotion, like an incontrovertible fact of his existence. Alden could not drink this. The cow hadn't offered it to him. What is this? He thought, beginning to panic. This is insane. Jeremy, give me your soda, he said desperately. What? No. Get your own. Alden snatched it and took a gulp so fast he almost choked on the bubbles. Okay then, said Jeremy, staring at him like he'd suddenly stolen his friend's drink for no reason. I guess I can get another one? Alden felt relief, but only a smidge of it. He could still drink. He wasn't going to thirst to death. But what the hell was this? Alden, are you having some kind of a breakdown? Alden shook his head. What was he supposed to say? That he had apparently caught a dietary restriction from Gorgon? Why would that be a thing on any planet? In any universe? And Alden hadn't drunk the alien's blood. It was the other way around. How could he have picked up contagious? Whatever this was. From that? And what about cheese? He thought frantically. I love cheese. And Italian beef. And pizza. Side effects, my ass. This is the worst. He stared at the sticky diner menu on the table in front of him with rising dread. He'd been planning to order hash browns and a cheddar scramble, but unless some noble chicken had laid eggs while. What? Hoping that Alden, specifically, would eat them? He was out of luck. Maybe it's temporary. He tried to trick himself into thinking it might be, and it worked surprisingly well. Yeah. I can put up with it for a few days until it fades. No sweat. No reason to act like a lunatic in front of my friends. I'll have the oatmeal, he said to the waitress when she came back around. No butter. Lots of brown sugar. And a side order of berries. Even the hash browns here were fried in delicious bacon fat. So oatmeal was the best he could do. His friends were staring at him. He cleared his throat. I'm on a cleanse, he said in a righteous voice. Okay, said Jeremy, looking nonplussed. What organ are you trying to cleanse with lots of sugar? Bo scoffed. Hey, I have my reasons. Fortunately, their food came quickly, and his friends were distracted by their own plates. Alden gave himself a mental pep talk while he spooned oatmeal into his mouth. It's fine. I'm a growing boy. I need fiber. And maybe there's a good side effect to counterbalance the bad side effect. It had to work that way, right? You couldn't just destroy someone's future as a major consumer of sausage deep dish without giving them something equal in return. Not like I can ask Gorgon. He can't tell me anything. I'd better not grow a spiky horn choker. He dug his spoon into his overly sugared breakfast scoop again and paused as he remembered. Oh, yeah. He couldn't tell me about side effects from the blood thing, but he did say I had a 70% chance of being chosen by the system. How would he even know that? Could he taste it or something? Then, he frowned as a new realization hit him. Never mind how he knows. 70% is. It's really high. He looked up to the TV, where the C-ranked shaper was waving goodbye to the camera as her interview ended. 70% meant it wasn't just a possibility he might get powers of his own one day. It meant it was likely. What am I supposed to do with that information? He felt a growing. Not excitement, exactly. It was more like nervous energy. Oatmeal and diet quandaries suddenly forgotten, his thoughts turned to facts about superpower acquisition. Almost everyone was chosen between the ages of 15 and 17. Outliers happened, but not often. Alden was a month and a half away from his 16th birthday. 16 is the most common. Something like 70% of superhumans received their access to the system after their 16th birthday and before their 17th. S ranks and R ranks were disproportionately chosen at 15. Ds and Fs were disproportionately chosen at 17. I'll most likely be chosen sometime in the next 14 months if Gorgon's right. The sweet spot for being an S rank is already past. The best I should reasonably hope for is A, and that's still a long shot. D and F mean you spend your life on the island or in an avowed zone, just chilling with a really restrictive passport keeping you from traveling as much as you want. B and C are superclass dependent. C brute is meh. C Meister might still be okay if it's in the right specialty area. He wanted to make contingency plans for every possibility, but that would take him a while. If Alden could make a shopping list for exactly the powers he wanted, he knew what he'd choose. But that was the thing about having a dream that only had a distant possibility of coming true, you could just let your imagination run wild. He'd want to be an S rank. Who wouldn't? And he would prefer to be an adjuster of some kind. It was a spell-heavy class that you could customize easily. His second choice would be the Meister class, though that one was more iffy. Meisters were powerful, but they had a lot less flexibility than adjusters. There was almost no wiggle room for them when it came to skill selection. So becoming something like a Swordmeister would be awful for Alden's goals, while becoming a Trapmeister would be fantastic. None of the other classes would really work. An S-rank brute was a titan, but they didn't get access to many spells, and their skills were usually pretty tightly focused. So they lacked versatility. Alden would need that in spades for what he wanted to do. He wanted to be a sidekick. Not an old school, dies as soon as you look at them sidekick. The contemporary version that was uncommon and unpopular but incredibly special when someone managed to make it work. True battlefield support. Like Hannah. Battlefield supports were superheroes who were strong enough to look after themselves in a fight but who focused on skills and spells that would do all the things that most heroes sucked at. They might have crowd control, structural damage mitigation, barriers, buffs, or dozens of other useful skills that made the thing other heroes did better. A great battlefield support was a hero who made it possible for the people they worked with to lay waste to a villain without demolishing a city. It was really interesting stuff. And it was important. If Hannah had been the support she dreamed of being, the one she was working to be, Alden's parents probably wouldn't have died. She just hadn't made it there yet. And now she never will. Right. Back to reality. He'd agreed to go to the funeral. He'd probably be hearing from Klijou any day about the portal. Alden sighed and looked down at his barely touched oatmeal. Bo, can't I borrow one of your ties next week? Yeah, of course. Bo spoke around a mouthful of omelet. You're going, then? I wondered why you were acting weird today. That's good. I have ties. Jeremy said quickly. You can borrow any of them. Alden shook his head. Jeremy's taste in clothes leaned toward the creative. I only need one. And I don't think a tie with chocolate chip cookies on it really says, funeral. But thanks anyway. Chapter 11. Look at what you've done to me, Alden said pitifully. It was evening, he was sitting in the cricket-filled lobby with Gorgon again, and he was picking chunks of tofu and pieces of lettuce out of an unwrap that had been incorrectly labeled vegan at a food truck he'd passed on the way over. Do you know why the bread at that place tastes fabulous? It's because it's grilled in butter. Do you know how I know that? It's because my brain now has an anti-Jornark living in it. How long do you think you will complain about this particular topic? The alien asked, licking coconut curry sauce from his own fingers. How long is the narc going to be in residence? Gorgon shrugged. Alden eyed him suspiciously. I'm not gonna grow horns, am I? Perhaps if you try very hard. Ha ha. You're a comedian now. You were telling me about your ambitions for your future, Gorgon reminded him. If you don't plan to continue, you can ride up and down the elevators again. Preferably in silence. Alden slumped against the cushions of the sofa he'd chosen for himself tonight. "So you're a bossy alien now that you've drunk my blood. That's just my luck." But Gorgon had a point. Alden had been whining for a while. He sighed. "I've pretty much told you everything, though. Hannah was a big influence. What happened to my parents was, too. I think battlefield support is a seriously important and underrated job. Plus it's cool. As for more specific ambitions, I'd love to be a frost-focused adjuster or a trapmeister or maybe something that was heavy on the buff abilities. But it's all just idle wishes. Even if the system does choose me, it's not like I can pick exactly the class I want. The pre-affixation trade is always an option," Gorgon said. "No doubt it will be a necessary one in your case, since you seem to have an uncommon vision for yourself. I'm sure you've realized that most classes lean strongly toward improving an individual's personal offense or defense. Classes that do otherwise tend to be ill-suited to spontaneous combat." Alden felt his eyebrows lift. When the system called you, there was a grace period of around 3 months before you had to accept your class. During that window, a selectee could trade classes with another willing person of equal rank who was still in their own grace period. It was the only time class trades were allowed. "That's all true," he said, popping a cube of tofu into his mouth, "but nobody trades good classes, do they? Isn't it just a bunch of unhappy people swapping the garbage classes around? That's what the internet says anyway." Gorgon made a humming sound. "A reasonable percentage of new avowed make trades. It's skewed heavily toward the lower ranks, of course, but it's not rare." "Wait. You can tell me stuff like that?" Gorgon shrugged again. "People who want to trade must do so with an approved witness at hand. I'm the witness for this region. It's my job to tell selectees this kind of thing." "Oh. But no specific class advice? None beyond what should already be abundantly obvious?" Alden grimaced. "What do the avowed need a witness for anyway? What do you witness exactly?" "It's a safety measure to confirm that someone who agrees to a class trade isn't suffering from undue outside influence. Many selectees have superhuman parents with strong opinions about their offspring's class choice. Sometimes they attempt to manipulate the situation." "You mean the parents of island-born supers? Their kid gets a class they don't like, and they, what? Threaten or mind sway someone into trading with them?" "They attempt to. Sometimes. It's not the norm, but it happens." Alden didn't doubt Gorgon, but he was surprised. He had never heard so much as a whisper about something like that. You'd think it would be all over the place if heroes got caught bullying teenagers into giving up their powers for worse ones. "What's the most traded class? Can you tell me that?" "It's brute. Obviously." "Oh, yeah. That is obvious. Sorry. Numbers matter. Roughly 30% of those chosen by the system were a brute type, which was a much higher percentage than any other class. Of course it would also be the most traded one. Of the brute classes, longsights seem to be the least popular variety. They are often offered up for trade and rarely accepted," Gorgon added. "Well, yeah. Having a superpower that lets you see really far away isn't very special. Binoculars exist." Gorgon made the clicking sound Alden had decided meant he wanted to say something but couldn't. He waited for a minute, but the alien didn't offer up any further comments on the subject. Alden considered the different classes. Only an idiot would trade healer of body, and a person would have to be an absolute moron to trade the super rare healer of mind. Even Alden would shift all his future plans in a heartbeat if those were offered. Sure, you were no good in a fight, but you could still help loads of people, and the class perks were the best. Any healer above D rank automatically received a passive that reduced the mental and physical effects of stress and a blessing called twice life. Which was exactly what it sounded like. A doubled lifespan. Combined with the fact that you could fix any normal disease that might want to take you out, it was a first-class ticket to living for an extra century. And at the highest ranks it was even better. There was an S-rank healer of body on the island who'd been chosen in the first year the system went into effect. She was nearly 80, and she still looked 16. So yeah. Nobody was going to put that class up for trade. Hannah said once that almost none of the people who grew up on Anzadora would take the sway class if they could help it. She had a friend who wanted to trade hers when she got it, but it was S rank and there was no one willing to trade for it at that level during her pre-affixation period. Gorgon nodded. That's true. Sway is the class that is the most frequently successfully traded. Almost always from the children of avowed those who are not as intimately familiar with the class's drawbacks. Alden understood how that could happen. Being a mind controller sounded really impressive until you realized that you would get great power in exchange for life as a social pariah and near prisoner on the island. Someone who didn't have that realization in time would get suckered into it. Do people ever trade a jester? Yes. But not often. The class is so flexible that it can be built in ways that would satisfy all but the pickiest user. What about unique classes? Ah, said Gorgon. Those are different. They can't be traded. Really? They are automatically affixed. No grace period. Seriously? Why? Gorgon shook his head. Alden sighed. Whoever bound you with such overkill restrictions should be kicked in the nades. That would be impossible for a number of reasons, said Gorgon. But I appreciate the sentiment. Pound sign, pound sign, pound sign. Hours later, after Alden had fallen asleep with one leg and an arm hanging off the side of the sofa, Gorgon turned out the last of the lobby lights. His eyes adjusted to the darkness in an instant, and he watched the boy silently. Human adolescence was such a foolish, vulnerable phase of existence, an extended period of childish expectations warring against adult realities. It was beautiful and stupid, like so many other aspects of life on Earth. Gorgon hoped his actions hadn't ruined whatever the boy had left of his own beautiful, stupid youth. You have chosen at long last, a voice from the distant past whispered in his mind. I have not chosen, Gorgon replied directly in his own language. I have only done what little I can in a world where there are no choices left to me. The voice was the echo of someone who had never even imagined such a world, so it had no way of answering him with useful advice or words of comfort. But he found himself hoping for some anyway. Teach him well, the echo said sagely. Gorgon sighed, a human habit he enjoyed mimicking on occasion, and rubbed at his manacles. He'd been pushing at the limits of his bindings in more ways than Alden knew, and they'd burned more in the past couple of weeks than they had in decades. I can't teach him at all. And if I could, he couldn't use my teachings. Our ways have disappeared, and there's no point in passing them on to a human. His world has its own problems. Those will be his to face. Our world's troubles will be no one's. Here, too, was something the echo could not comprehend. That the whole of the universe it had known might pass from existence, that Gorgon might be utterly and truly alone, that a successor's purpose could be his own and not the purpose that had been the very center of every other chosen one's life. Now is the time to be fearless and accept the blessing of the devouring with humility, as your predecessors did before you. No, Gorgon whispered into the quiet lobby. No. I won't be doing that. I'm sorry to disappoint you, my teacher. I am full of fear and unwilling to end. Not yet. Not until my work is finished. Our work is done when our successors are chosen, the echo said. So it has always been. My work now is different than any you've known before, Gorgon replied. My current work is revenge. I have not heard of this work. Perhaps it was only Gorgon's imagination, but the echo sounded concerned. I know, my teacher. Don't worry. It's not so far away from purging an infection or correcting an imbalance. It's just taking me a long time. If the price has been paid, the work must be completed. The echo sounded more confident now. No matter how long it takes. Oh, the price was paid, Gorgon muttered. It was paid and paid again, by those who could not refuse to pay it. Beyond the cold glass, the sun was rising. It was a breathtaking sight on this planet. Such a near, warm star. How you would weep to see me here, he whispered. The last and least of us, chained up in a foreign paradise while our home lies dead beyond the gates of space and time. The echo had no response to that, which was something of a relief. Gorgon headed back to his computer and clicked away from the security feed. His custom system access CGO was right in the center of the desktop, like always. He clicked it, and lines of teeth-grindingly familiar text appeared on the screen. Honorable guest number 231, name unknown, would you like to accept a contract of service in exchange for great power, future opportunity, and significant personal freedom? No, Gorgon said. He liked to pretend that not cursing at his captors every time he was asked this question would bother them more in the long run. Honorable guest number 231, thank you for your consideration. Logging you in as prisoner number 12,005,794, preferred ID, Gorgon. How may I assist you in the completion of your duties today, Gorgon? Access all current pre-affixation trade requests. Access granted. Gorgon scrolled down the familiar list with a great deal more interest than usual. A lot of it was the normal dross. The boy was right, to an extent. Even foolish teenagers rarely traded the obviously superior class assignments. But after decades of use, humans had barely scratched the surface of the system. They had such a poor understanding of all but the most simple classes. Gorgon knew, though he couldn't explain it clearly to the boy, that there was no such thing as a weak class. Situationally weak, yes. Long sights really were useless. For the first few years. On Earth. But the system was designed from the ground up to create a theoretically balanced power trade between the Avowed and the Artonans who would summon them for various quests. The trick was in knowing how to use a class properly to take advantage of that. Of course, the Artonans preferred not to help Earth along on that front. All the better for them to technically gift other planets every bit of the power they promised while offering meager or misleading instructions when it came to its usage. It kept the lower species in line. Gorgon's nostrils flared as he stared at the list in front of him. Even he didn't have a perfect understanding of what all the various classes did. But the battlefield support role the boy desired should be manageable with a trade-in to. Yes, there it was. And it was gone just as quickly. Ah. Frustrating. The class Gorgon had in mind was seen as an extremely undesirable one for those who dreamed of being superheroes, and at the same time, it was a class certain other people longed for. In fact, some newly chosen Avowed waited through their entire grace periods trying to acquire it. And it wasn't common. Less than 2% last time he checked. So it popped up at random intervals and was snapped up just as quickly. Much like the Sway class. How was he supposed to point the boy toward it in the event that it became necessary? He couldn't just tell him to choose it. Or maybe he could, but he wasn't willing to pay the price for doing so. He liked Alden, but not enough to die for him. The magic that bound him worked on a very clever spell framework that had a limited ability to read his true intentions. So it was more flexible than it might have been, but it was also better able to identify infractions on his part. Well, he had nothing better to do with his time right now. He would work on the problem. Scheming was as good a cure for boredom as any other. Tope continued. Thanks for listening.